Greetings, Super Wednesdays from the Holy Apple. We're on the 4th day of the new month, Kislev 5778. Don't worry, our motto has not changed. The class is for the sake of heaven. This class is for the sake of redeeming the holy presence out of the exile and to improve ourselves, even one small step, which in our times is no small deal. It's a big deal. Okay, so we are on here, we'll call it part 3. BT, FFB, who is greater? BT, Baal Teshuva, newcomers to Judaism. FFBs, Frum, from birth, those people that have been religious all their lives, were born into religious families. Last week we discussed that when you hear such an issue, first of all your antennas have to rise up, because there are many questions that a person has to ask themselves. We know on one hand that in one tractate in the Talmud it says that in the place where the newcomers to Judaism stand, not even the greatest of the righteous can stand in their place. Seems like it gives the victory over to the BT crowd, the newcomers. On the other hand, we have another Talmud tractate which says that the prayers of a righteous person, son of a righteous family, is far greater than the son or daughter of a wicked mother or father, or both. So we have a little bit of a contradicting, to say the least, opinion here. Which way do we go? Next question a person has to ask, when it says that when we're talking about a newcomer to Judaism, we have to know what brought him back to Judaism. Some people come back to Judaism out of fear. They might be fear of punishment. They might be fearful of Judgment Day. They might be fearful to leave their country, and they want to become Jewish, to go to another country. Some newcomers are more wholehearted, some are less. In today's world, we have people that call themselves newcomers, but most of the old baggage still travels with them, which means that they're really basically practitioners of ritual. But as far as true blue and white Judaism, Torah outlook on life, they are very far from it. So we have to decide, what does it mean when we use the expression Baal Teshuva, a newcomer? Was it talking about everyone, all newcomers? That would be something that's hard to swallow. Next question we have to ask is, what kind of sins were they involved? All kinds of sins. There's moral sins, there's ethical sins, there's religious sins, there's sins between man and man, there are sins between man and God. What kind of sins were they involved in? Another question that a person should be asked. When we mentioned a newcomer, perhaps we're talking about someone that was righteous and fell, stumbled a little bit, and then came back. Maybe we're not talking at all about a person that grew up in the garbage, grew up in the sewer. Those people are so far out, even if they do tshuva, even if they do repent, they're still perhaps out of the stadium. And maybe we're talking about a newcomer, meaning that, no, it's not really a newcomer, it's a person that's always been religious, however he fell, or she fell, and then they came back. Maybe that's what the Talmud is talking about, that those are the great people, that even the righteous all their lives and never fell cannot even reach these people. So we have many questions. Last week, you could look it up, second part was last week. We basically went following the opinion we gave the BTs first at bat as, the visiting team. So we saw many opinions, many commentaries that actually the newcomers to Judaism are far superior than the people that were always religious from birth, and we gave many, many reasons why that is. That was last week. Okay, this week we will start with one more opinion, which we did not have time last week. One more opinion is the outlook of the Zohar Kadosh, the mystical part of the Torah, that in many, many places, I'm not going to read them all. Anybody interested, could email me or leave a comment. Happy to give you all. There's about 4 or 5 different sources that I have in front of me right now. I'm not going to read them all, but we'll just give one example. The Zohar is very clear that the newcomers to Judaism have surpassed those that are religious from birth. So we'll just give one example. This is in the book of Genesis, the 39th page, side 1. In the 5th sanctuary of spirituality, of holiness, there sits all the people that repented. And in this sanctuary where all the repenters hang out in the spiritual worlds, not even the greatest of the righteous are allowed entrance into this sanctuary. So that is pretty that is pretty straight out and forward. According to the Zohar Kadosh, and once again there's 4 or 5 other places, he makes it pretty clear about the stand. Okay, now this week we're going to start in defense of the FFBs, the ones that were religious from the beginning. Okay, batting first, we have the commentary, Yad Yosef, on tractate, Yevamot, 64, side 1. The Yad Yosef says the following Torah. He says, though the Torah specifically praises, for example, Rebecca, because of the fact that even though she was from a terrible family, from a very, very wicked family, even so she never fell, and she kept herself very righteous. So this is an amazing thing. So the Torah recognizes it. What I just said is written in a few places, in a few sources. But still, even though we praise Rebecca for not learning and not copying the wicked deeds of her family members, even so, when it comes to prayer, the righteous, or the children of the righteous, their prayers are far more preferential. Why? Because they have a concept which is called Zchut Avot. We know that when a person leaves the world, they don't just leave here and they're gone. It's not like, the I Dream of Jeannie, like, boom, like she disappears, you don't know where she is. But when a person goes on to the next world, when passes on to the next world, there are still the merit of that father or patriarch or matriarch figure continues to support what's going on with the family, especially with the person's family. They continue to have a tremendous influence, which means that if a person did great things in their lives, it continued. The merit does not just end when the person dies, but it continues to be spread to the next generation. And if good deeds continue for up to 2,000 generations. So a lot of times if we look in the mirror, we might be patting ourselves on the shoulder. Oh, you're such a great guy, wow, man, you're something else. But it's not really us, because we are really riding on the shoulders. In Chassidut, there's an expression of a midget riding on the shoulders of a giant. So the midget thinks he's all, he's all tough, he's all cool. He's one of these, gigantic Kareem Abdul-Jabbar figures, or Wilt Chamberlain kind of people, But he's nothing, he's a midget. However, why is he above everybody else? Because of the fact that he's on the shoulders of the giants, which means our descendants, our relatives who are no longer with us. So we are still reaping the benefits of their good deeds. So it seems to be Yad Yosef, the commentator, he seems to be saying something very interesting, that there is no real contradiction to what the Talmud is saying, because there's, as we mentioned, there are two discussions. One places the newcomers number one, and the other one places the righteous, who are children of righteous people, they're the number one. So Yad Yosef makes a clean cut here, as many other commentators do, that there's no contradiction between these two tractates. One is talking about prayers. When it comes to prayers, then the religious from birth is in a much better position than a person that comes from a wicked family, because of the fact that if you ever notice, when we say the Amidah prayer, then we're talking about the first paragraph that we discuss is reminding God, so to speak, bringing up the merit of our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Right? That's such an important concept in Judaism that that's the opening lines of our Amidah, the 18 benediction prayers that we have 3 times a day during the week. So when it comes to prayers, we have a lot of assistance if we are FFBs. We are, religious from birth. And whereas if you're a newcomer, you don't have that assistance to your benefit. You're basically pushing yourself, which is great. You're moving yourself up, but it's much easier. Imagine if you're stuck and you have 4, 5, 6 people pushing your car, you're going to get out of there. But if you're just pushing the car, you might be there for quite some time, Jack. Okay. Moving right along, our next source is Rav Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin. He writes in his book, Likutei Ma'amarim, on page 48 and pages 48 and 49, says something very, very interesting, that if you look at a Jew and you look at a convert, you understand the principle of a Jew that is religious from birth and a newcomer to the religion. How's that? He says the following, very interesting. He says, what's the difference between a convert and a regular routine Jew? He says that with a Jew, that God, before even testing out the Jewish people, God chose the Jewish people. Which means, if you look at Abraham, who is the first Jew, he was picked by God regardless of his actions. His actions were great, but that's not why he was chosen. He was chosen to the fact that there's something special about Abraham, disregarding what he is doing. So Rav Tzadok brings down that there's a special soul that has been given to the Jewish people, and this soul was given disregarding our actions, which means we could be lowlifes, we could be wicked people, we will be punished, of course, for it, but the holy spiritual root remains. And at any time, and at any split second, the true us can shine through. Whereas, if a person is a convert, that's not the way it works. If a person wants to become Jewish, he or she has to work hard. I have a friend of my mom just converted this past week. She was studying day in and day out for 3.5 years in Jerusalem. 3.5 years, okay? So that's a lot of hard work. That's a lot of sweat and tears. Whereas a Jew, as it says in the Talmud Sanhedrin, even if a Jew sins, he's still considered to be a Jew. What does that mean? That the source is still pure. As we say in the morning prayers, Elohai, Nishama shenatata bi teorahi. We ourselves have polluted our bodies, but our souls are pure. When they were given to us, it was pure, and it's not affected by our terrible actions. Other parts of us, like our body or like our nefesh, they are influenced by our sins. But the holy soul of a Jew, which is special, and once again, Abraham was chosen not after he proved himself with all the 10 tests. He was chosen as Abraham before we knew anything about him at all. And that's the whole idea. This is brought down many, many times, for example, in the Maharal, to explain the difference between a Jew and a convert. So the same thing Rav Tzadok writes in this Likutei Ma'amarim, same difference exists between an FFB, someone that's religious from birth, and the difference between him and a newcomer to Judaism. Okay, not a convert. We're talking about, of course, a Baal Teshuva, a person that is Jewish but has come back. He says it's the same exact difference. A person that is righteous and he's from a righteous family, there is this purity without even doing anything. There's this holiness that evolves around that person without even getting up off his chair, without even doing things. There's a certain there's this certain positive energy, spirituality this person has. There's a special holiness of this person. On the other hand, the newcomer, the BT, the Baal Teshuva, has to be constantly protecting himself by doing good deeds and staying away from bad elements. It's kind of like a little bit similar to, you have somebody that's an alcoholic, you have somebody that's a drug addict. One of the first steps for them to get back on their feet is they have to stay away at all times, and they have to be on the alert to make sure that there is no falling. Because if they come near the substance, if they come near the alcohol, they're just going to fall back. So they have to constantly be sweating and working and staying away from this kind of stuff and moving forward, moving. Where the righteous person with the righteous family, he is able to sit back and kick back, and he's not doing anything positive now. Okay? He's not doing anything negative either, but he's not doing anything positive. Even so, there's a certain spiritual holiness that person has. So that's the difference. A righteous, according to this Rav Tzadok HaKohen from Lublin, he's telling us that the righteous person has a benefit. The child of a righteous family has the benefit over a newcomer to Judaism who comes from a negative family. They have to be working on themselves constantly, and they have to keep their heads above water, or else they will drown. If they do not keep their heads above water, they will drown. Whereas a righteous person, he's experienced and he's okay. Even if he goes below the water, he's fine. He knows how to hold his breath underwater, and he's okay. So we see here a victory from Rav Tzadok to the FFBs. In another source of Rabbi Tzadok, in Risisei Laila, pages 2 and 3, Rav Tzadok here says something very interesting. Here he makes a differentiation between two subjects. As we discussed, Yad Yosef, the commentator that we mentioned 5 minutes ago, he makes a very, very distinct difference between the two Talmuds. One, the righteous, children of righteous are much greater than the newcomers when it comes to prayers. On the other hand, when it comes to other qualities, the newcomer has a one-upmanship on the righteous from birth. And he explains it the following, that even though God hears all the prayers of all people, whether you're righteous or whether you're wicked, if you turn to God, God hears a person's prayers. That doesn't mean that we always get a yes, a positive answer. Many times no is also an answer. However, prayers are a special, unique subject. And prayers are connected to being, prayers are dependent on our purity and our purity of holiness. Now, a person that's seen the world, a person that's been on the streets, a person that's walked the walk, a person that's talked the talk, they're great people, they're beautiful people, but they still have been affected. Their eyes, their ears, their nose, their mouth. It is nowhere when prayers, in order for a person's prayers to really connect to God on the highest level, we're not talking about there's millions of levels that we connect on prayers. But if a person really would want to connect on the highest level, the most pure and holy level, that is only possible, according to Rav Tzadok, by the FFBs, those that are religious from birth, because there's a certain purity that they have that does not exist on the BT community. Those, the ones that, grew up on the streets, those that were, those that know what's those that walk the streets of the world. So very interesting that God, when listening to our prayers, you have most chance that your prayers will be heard if we have a righteous person from a righteous family, because prayers are dependent on the purity and the holiness and the cleanliness of one's heart. And even though, once again, a BT is a great person, a fantastic person, he's also righteous, 100%, but they still have been affected. They still have been affected. It's like if you ever, start playing with tires, okay, so you wash your hands with soap, but I hate to lay with this, anybody that knows when you start cars and you start, taking apart your cars, seeing what's wrong, look at your hands. Even though you could wash them, it's great, you're washing your hands, but there's something about the hands of a mechanic that they never 100% clean. No way, because just that stuff that he's touching, that grease, that grime, that oil that he's touching, it doesn't come off 100%. It's not the same. You could have a garment and it's not the same. You might wash it and okay, it's clean, but if you, to a person with a good eye, they're able to see that there's a difference here between a totally clean piece of clothing and some piece of clothing that was dirty and we've washed it or we dry cleaned it. So it is clean also, but you can't compare the levels, and that's what we're talking about here. Next. The Code of Jewish Law, 53, we're talking about Orach Chaim 53:4, it says the following. These are the laws of who do we choose to lead us in prayers. Who do we choose to lead us in prayers? So it says it has to be somebody that is a upstanding person. What does it mean? That's what the Jewish law book asks. It means the following: a person that should be void of sins, and also a person that has a good name, and at no time, even when he was a child, at no time did he have a bad name for himself. People from the time that the person was a child up until teenager, person always had a good name. He had a good name for himself. So two conditions that the Code of Jewish Law bring down, that if you want someone to lead the prayers, we have two conditions here. Number one, they have to be people that do not have sins. And number two, they need to be people that since the time that they were young, they always had a good name, and they did not have a bad name. People did not look them and point them out, oh, you know that kid over there, he's a real punk, or he just he beats people up, or he robs, or he steals, does drugs, he molests people. He never had a bad name from the beginning. So it seems very clear that the take of the Code of Jewish Law is taking and giving the victory to the FFBs, for those that are religious from birth. Once again, we could always throw in that not necessarily, because perhaps that once again we're talking about here, this is the Code of Jewish Law, which is discussing the laws of prayers. But however, if we were discussing other laws, or if we were looking at different angles of a person's life, then we might say that even the Code of Jewish Law would say that the newcomers are better than surpass those religious from birth. So that's also a possibility. Okay. Now our next stage, that was our second stage, where we saw various ideas, various commentators that spoke about the benefits of being FFB, religious from birth, which takes precedence over those newcomers. Okay, now we're going to discuss a little bit about what kind of sins are we talking about. When we're talking about a person that was involved in sin, what kind of sins were he or she involved in? Or maybe doesn't make a difference. That's number one. And also we will discuss here in the next 5 or 6 commentators, we will also discuss what kind of repentance was done. As I mentioned at the beginning of the class, today especially, there are so many people that wear the BT hat, the newcomer's hat, but when you really sit down and speak with them, there's not much of a difference between them and your average humanist, liberal, Democrat. Some people say that the most popular religion in America is not Christianity, not Islam, and not Judaism. It's liberalism. So that's also today kind of a religion. So what kind of BTs are we talking about? Newcomers are we talking to? Okay, our first source is the Minorat HaMeor, which was written by Rav Abuhav. And Rav Abuhav writes in his book Minorat HaMeor on page 584, 585, it's in the 5th candle. That's the name of the chapter. In the 5th candle, it's the first principle, and it's the subject of repentance. The Minorat HaMeor, Rabbi Abuhav, he brings down the Talmud, which talks about how there are no greater people than the BTs, than the newcomers to religious Judaism. These are the best. However, and then he says something amazing. He says the following point. He says, what I've said so far, that a BT, a newcomer, is great, far greater than a person that's FFB, religious from birth. That goes under only certain categories. However, if we find that a person that was a Jew that sinned in the category of rational commandments, we know in the Torah there are different types of commandments. There are commandments that are commandments that we understand. They're rational, practical. Even if God did not necessarily say it in the Bible, we would still be doing it. Like a person to, let's say, to honor your parents. Even if it was not written in the Bible that a person should honor their parents, most people get it. You know, if you have any brain in your head, you got the point that look at all the tremendous efforts that your parents have done for you. You know, especially when you become a parent. If you haven't become a parent, you might not know because you never went through it. But a person that's a kid that becomes a parent themselves, they really, really appreciate what their parents done, because all of a sudden, you know, they have these sleepless nights, and you know, they're just like, they look like zombies out of there. What's going on? Oh, I haven't slept in, you know, a week or two. The baby's crying all night. It's really difficult. They start to appreciate, you know, you got to clean up the diapers, you got to wash them off, you got to get your hands all dirty. I'm not going to go into the gory details. If you know Hamevin Yavin, those that understand. But there are many laws that are in the Torah that are rational and understood by all, even if we were not commanded by them. So Rav Abuav says an amazing Torah. He says the following: if we know that there was a Jew that was a wicked Jew, or a person that was not following the Torah, not necessarily wicked, but however, the sins that that person committed were sins that go against human nature, human understanding, rationale, commandments. If a person did transgress those kind of commandments, that soul of a person is not greater than a religious from birth person. Okay, so that's a very interesting take, an angle by Rabbi Yitzchak Abuhav in his book. So if what the Talmud was talking about, how a newcomer is greater than one that's religious from birth, that's talking about commandments that we don't understand, that are beyond us, or that's talking about all kinds of lusts, all kinds of desires that we have. Let's say a person he has trouble controlling, his contact with women, and those are things that a person has a evil inclination. A person is always thinking about this subject. He's dealing with it. So if he did those kinds of transgressions, that person, if he overcomes that, then of course he is greater than the religious from birth. However, if the newcomer transgressed many violations of things that are practical, things that are rational in the Torah, then the righteous from birth is far greater than them. Our next source is the Marsha. The Marsha writes on Tractate Brachot, on the 34th page, side 2. Says something very interesting. What the Talmud says, that the BT, the newcomer, is preferable to the religious from birth, that's only talking in certain circumstances. What's the circumstances? Listen very closely. When the Talmud says that the newcomer is greater than the righteous from birth, that's talking about if the newcomer had various thoughts to do sins before, as he was on his process, or before he started becoming a BT, a newcomer to religious Judaism. If a person has a thought, a bad thought to do a sin, and they overcame that sin, in that case, according to the opinion of Rabbi Avahu, then the newcomer is far greater than the righteous from birth who never has those thoughts. So the newcomer who has all these thoughts to go and transgress against God's will, if he's able to overcome those thoughts and not do anything about them, not practice any of them, he overcomes them, he is far greater, according to Rabbi Avahu, than the righteous person from birth who does not have that conflict, inner conflict. However, Rabbi Yochanan comes by and says, no, even in such a case where on one hand the newcomer has all kinds of thoughts to do transgressions, and the righteous from birth has no such thoughts to go against God's will, the person who's righteous from birth is still far greater, according to Rabbi Yochanan. Why? Because of the fact that how clean that person is. There's no fight for him. There's none of this dirt. You know, it's kind of embarrassing. Think about it. If a person would admit to somebody, you know what? Let's say a guy tells a friend of his, you know what? Yesterday I saw a person, I thought of stealing his wallet. Now, would you want to be friends with that guy? No, you wouldn't want to be friends that a person would have such a thought. Okay, he didn't steal the wallet, very nice. But the fact that he has such thoughts, you don't want to have anything to do with that guy. Like, stay away, Jack. So that's the idea. Rabbi Yochanan says that this person, okay, he's fighting it out, but still, the fact that he has such thoughts, that he has a possibility to transgress against God's will, this big fight, and he has to put up a gigantic fight, it's much greater to be a person whose pure thoughts and does not have these terrible thoughts about doing all kinds of bad things. It could be man to man, or could it be man to God? However, the Maharsha says, very interesting, he says that, but if it comes down to actions, then there's no question here. Once again, the whole debate, argument between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Avu, who is greater, it only comes into play when there are thoughts or not having thoughts. But if it comes down to actual deeds, then there's no question here that a FFB, a person that's religious from birth, that does not do bad deeds, is far greater than a person that when he was not religious did all these kinds of bad deeds. So the Maharsha, very interesting, differentiates between thought, then there's a question mark here, and when it comes to action, there is no dispute according to the Maharsha. The Maharsha says this, both Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Avahu agree that in such a situation where a person actually transgressed God's will, not just thought, but actually did it, performed it, then there's no dispute between these two giant sages. They both agree that the FFB is far spiritually off better than the newcomer.